In this Blender retopology tutorial, we're going to retopologize clothing from a 3D scan. We'll use retopology tools in Blender to overlay a plane and then move the plane around while it is projected onto the surface of our 3D scan mesh. This allows you to make a low poly shell for a cloth simulation that you can use with your animations in Blender. We can also then bake the textures and the normal maps from the original high poly 3D mesh scan of clothing. Here in Blender, I have a 3D scan of a button-down shirt that I'm going to retopologize. There's a couple things in Blender to set up before you begin retopology. The first thing is to change your snap base to face project. Then make sure backface culling is selected and also enable rotate and scale. If you tab into edit mode and you select the snap base, there's also the option for include active. We want to uncheck include active. Now we're ready to create the plane that we're going to use for retopology. I'll press Shift A, Mesh Plane. The plane comes into Blender wherever your 3D cursor is. Tab into edit mode, press R, X90. This brings the plane up. Then press S, 0.01 just to scale it down. Then GZ to move it up to somewhere where the mesh is, and then GY to move it out in front. If I click the Y direction, I'm looking straight at the shirt, and then I can press G to move this plane into position. We're in edit mode, and if I off-click the plane, I can't see through the mesh. But if I click Mesh Edit Mode Overlays in Blender, I can click Retopology Shading. Now I can see the mesh through the face of the retopology plane. Then I can move this around with the G tool, but it's not very helpful because it's going to be off the shirt, as you can see here. That's not really the shape of the shirt. If I snap back to the front and then I click the magnet, press A and then G, suddenly it is now snapped to the shirt. So this is a really good way to have the retopology follow the flow of the shirt. So the way to do this is to ignore the collar and the details first, and just get everything into position to have a good flow around the panels of the garment. By default, Blender is select box, but if you switch to tweak, then you can grab the individual vertices. So if I'm in vertex mode, I can just grab them without having to press the G key. This is very helpful when you're doing retopology work. You can also use the poly build tool. This is down on the lower left. This allows you to instantly extrude an edge and then also grab and tweak vertices. As we go around the front part of the shirt, we want to be able to turn with an edge loop here. Then I'll also bring down maybe 3 loops right here. We don't want to be too detailed. We want to keep it generally loose, and then we can always add more edge loops as we go around. Be careful with face project because it really only works with the faces that you can see. So you have to constantly move around and then grab the ones that are there for you to use. So I'm just going around to the back of the collar here, just roughing out this main shape. I'm going to leave a space in the back here because I'll bridge the mirror of the mesh. So this is enough to get started right here in the front. Now I want to bring this over to the sleeve. And the important thing is to follow these seams. So I stop this vertex right at this seam, and then I can just pull everything straight over. So I'll switch back to tweak, and I can select these edges in edge mode, and then just press E and move over. Then I can press E again and move over. I'm just going to have 2 edges for right now. I can always add another edge loop. Now I want to move these into position where they belong around this seam. So I'll definitely need another edge loop here, so I might as well press Ctrl R and put an edge loop in. That'll help keep that in line, and then just move these along to the seam. I want the edge flow of the back yoke of the shirt to follow the collar, so I use the poly build tool, and if I hold Control, I can then build polygons just like that. That looks pretty good. And then now I can have both of these start to come over, but this is a little thick, so I'll just move these in. Then I can grab these 2 edges, press E, R to rotate them around, and this will start to make this flow over from the collar. Remember, we'll be adding much more subdivision. We just want to get the big parts. You can use merge vertices. Select this vertice, hold shift, then press ML to merge last. You can also use auto merge, but I find that to be a little bit more problematic because sometimes it doesn't merge when I want to, and other times it merges when I don't want it to. So that's up to you, but you may prefer this. Continue to tweak the layout. Definitely going to need another edge loop here, so I might as well add that now. I can rotate these around, press G, select this vertice, hold shift, ML. Then just kind of move around and get these into position so they look okay. Sometimes you may have to hide the shirt or whatever scan to select a vertice. And then I can just press G and move this back up to where it should be. Generally in retopology, you want to keep everything kind of evenly spaced. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then in areas of greater detail, you may have more polygons. So these should be moved up. Now I have a nice flat line to go down there. I think next I'm going to go ahead and make the sleeve. So I want the sleeve to have its own edge flow. So if I press 2, I can select all of these edges, press E to extrude. Now if I extrude with project face on, it's going to mess everything up. You see how it only goes to those faces? So I'll press Control Z. Instead of project face, I can do face nearest. This is another important snapping tool in retopology in Blender. Now if I press E, I can extrude, but notice how the edges stay around the form. Then once I have that, I can go back to the Poly Build tool and select this edge and continue around that seam. So I just want to follow this seam and just move straight around the sleeve. This will create its own edge flow that we can use to go down the sleeve. Just work your way around. You can adjust everything later. Don't be too self-conscious about how many edge loops you're creating. We can always eliminate or add as needed. Generally just kind of keep the same density as other parts of the mesh. And then I'll switch to tweak and I'll use manually merging by last, ML, ML, merge those vertices. And then I can just move these around to straighten up. And then so I don't forget that this is the seam, I'll press 2 and then Alt or Option to select that edge loop. And I also want to make sure I get the edge loop down here, hold Shift Option. And I don't want these two edges. So this edge loop here is going to be the seam. So I'll right click, mark seam. So now I have this nice red line reminding me that's a seam. I can also do the same here. And I'll mark a seam. And then this will also be a seam when I work on the collar, but I'll do that in a little bit. This also will be a seam. So I'll right click, mark seam. This is just a visual reminder before you actually UV unwrap it. You need to make sure you go back and put everything in the proper position. Now that I have good edge flow on the sleeve, I can select that entire edge loop, then right click LoopTools Relax. And then in the LoopTools Relax, I can change the iterations to 25. And now it really smooths that out. Then I can press G and move it down, R to rotate. There's two ways to do this. I could go all the way down to the cuff, or I can make an intermediate position at the elbow. I usually put an edge loop at the elbow rather than going all the way, but depending on your mesh, either way could work. I'll press G to move this down. Notice that I'm in face nearest right now rather than face project. Then I can rotate this, right click, LoopTools Relax, press G. And now you can see how that really has all those lines pretty evenly spaced, and I have that at the elbow. Then I'll press E again, come all the way down to the cuff, rotate a little bit, G, and I need to use the loop tools to relax, loop tools, relax. Press G, and then I want to press R just to rotate that and then get that close to the cuff. There's a few tweaks we need to do, so I could zoom in here, switch the vertex mode, and then just move these up to where the cuff is. Sometimes it's good to go ahead and fix these things as you go, and other times you can fix it all later with some smoothing. But since I definitely want this to be on the cuff, now is the time to do it. Switch back to edge mode, select that entire loop, and then I'll do one more extrude down to the edge of the cuff. I might be able to just rotate this by pressing R, right-click Loop Tools, then Relax. So that's pretty good right there. And now I can just go ahead and add in some loop cuts. Control R, put an even spacing, I think something like that, maybe one more. And I can right click LoopTools Relax with them all selected and then press G and they fit in there pretty even. I'll do the same thing down here. Control R, put in some loop cuts, right click LoopTools Relax, then press G to move them so they all snap. And then probably just one more loop cut down at the cuff here. Control R. So that sleeve looks pretty good. Of course, there's some places that I might want to add some geometry or move things around, but that is all pretty well retopologized. Now I'm going to bring down the back panel down to where this panel is, make this connection under the arm, and then connect everything down at the bottom of the shirt tails. So with 2 selected, I'll press E, move down to approximately there, E again, maybe scale a bit, one more E, and then that's about as far as I can go with this right now. I need to add more loops for the actual curvature. And then here I can't see that, so I'll switch to 1. Now I'm also going to switch back to face project. It works a little better for targeting where you want your vertices to go. So now if I press G, you can see it just snaps right up to the top of that face. Then you want to come in and go ahead and merge these vertices. And it'll be different for every garment, but eventually there'll be an obvious point where you want to cut the shirt into the next panel and have that edge flow move from one direction to the next. If you accidentally extrude on a seam, you can just select those edges, right click, clear seam. Bring the 3D scan back, and now we're doing pretty well. We just need to connect around the bottom of the shirt. This is where the poly build tool comes in handy in Retopology and Blender. If I hold Control, I can grab these two and move that down right there. And it just snaps right into place. And then I can do the same thing with these next ones and move around. So I want to start to move just around the shirt here. And face project generally works pretty well rather than face nearest for these operations. And then I can bring this one over. I think that looks pretty good. And then just come right over to there. Here I have one extra panel depth. So I'm just going to press 2, select these edges as I go around here. And then I want to switch from face project to face nearest. And then press E, just extrude down a bit, right click LoopTools Relax, G to move. And now that's pretty straight right there. I can maybe just move it up a little bit. 1, and then I'll merge these vertices, ML. And then over here, that should all be fine. Occasionally when you're moving something around, you can get a strange situation like this. So just hide the original mesh and then you can slide these vertices around. So this needs much more detail, but we're starting to get into where we need to be. So I'll press 2 and then hold Alt or Option to get that entire loop there. And now as you can see, I can just extrude this straight down the shirt as many times as I need. So if I press E and just bring that down, right click LoopTools Relax. Sometimes you need to do that twice, then press G. That locks those into place. And then you can kind of look to see if you want to rotate those to be a bit more flat. So here I can just kind of rotate that. And then right click LoopTools Relax one more time. And that's looking pretty good as it comes around. So then I can just press E. Again, we can always add more edge loops, extrude again, extrude one more time, press R to rotate, right click LoopTools Relax. And that looks pretty good. Now we need to move these edge loops over so they can be the center of the shirt. So if I right click all those, press S, X, and scale them in the X direction so they're a little bit flatter. Right click LoopTools Relax. So now that's looking a lot better, but I need to move these pieces over. So these vertexes are spaced a bit more. And really because of the way the edge flow works, I want to have an extra piece in the middle here. So I can just bring this over. I dissolved an edge from an accidentally merged vertice over here, but I think I'm going to fix that by having this actually flow down the back of the shirt. So I can select this line, right click Subdivide, press 1, that adds a vertice there. And then I can join them together right here. And that will make those be 2 faces. Then I can press Control R to add an edge loop, put that right there, press 1, select this vertice and this one, and press J. So now I have the flow going down the back here. Then go around and tweak where your vertices are so they look nice and even following the blocks of the fabric. And then make sure when you're looking from the back that nothing is crossing the center line and that you kind of even these up just a little bit. Because we're going to duplicate them and join it together with a bridge. We don't want to have anything in the way. Slide that back over, and I think we're looking pretty good. So now I'm going to select everything by pressing A. Make sure you turn off snapping, press Shift D, then X, slide this over, but it's the wrong way. So if I press S -1, that mirrors it. And then if I press RX 180, that flips it around, but unfortunately the normals are on the wrong side. So I need to go to Mesh, Normals, Flip. Now they're flipped. Then look from the front, press G to kind of move this into position. You may need to rotate it a bit. Look from the back. So now that looks like it's pretty well in position. Then if I turn snapping back on and make sure you're not face project, you want to use face nearest, select that, press G, and everything just snaps into place. Of course, we need to make some adjustments, but now I can go ahead and make a bridge between these. So I press 2, and then hold Alt or Option on that edge, then Shift, Alt or Option, right-click, LoopTools Bridge. Now I have a nice line in the middle here. Then I can press Control R, add a loop cut right in the middle. I have a pretty good center line that I can use. I need to connect that seam all the way through. So if I click these two, right-click, Mark Seam. Now I have a continuous seam on the back. That looks pretty nice. Of course, there's some cleanup to do on the sleeve here, and I need to add some more edge loops going around the large portion of the shirt. We also need to add in the collar. The way to do the collar is to treat it as two pieces. Once you get everything kind of where it needs to be, so you'll turn off snapping and then manually sculpt the collar, and then make another piece with snapping for the top part of the collar. Then you can join those together. So for example, right now this is in the wrong spot, but if I would to manually bring this down, you can see how this starts to become a collar stand. I can bring this other part of the collar down, and then this is the actual collar stand that I can sculpt manually. It doesn't take much to get that to be in the right position. It's just a vertical piece of fabric. So you can see how that's a vertical piece of fabric. And then if I bring the 3D scan back and I press Shift A, Mesh Plane, it's down here, tab into edit mode, RX90, S.1, bring that up to here, scale it down some more. Then if I turn snapping back on and I use face project, I can move this into place on the collar. And this time I'm actually sculpting the collar. So I can just move these pieces right where they need to be. So I'll get a good edge of the collar and then just extrude down. And it's probably asymmetrical. Of course, you can mirror this, but it's a small piece, so you can just kind of extrude around and make it as a one-off. Eventually, all the edge loop counts need to match up, but you can always add or subtract as needed. So don't be too self-conscious. Put the edge loops where you think you need them to hold the detail, with the goal of generally using as few as possible until you definitely need more edge loops. I'm going to hide the original plane so I can just see the collar. And then if I press 2, so if I select this bottom row of edges on the collar, and then as long as I'm on face nearest, I can then extrude them. Then once they're extruded, move them into position around the collar. Sometimes it's better to switch back to face project so you can just put them right where you see them. And use the seams that are on the garment as a guide. The original garment used these seams, and you should use them too. So now I have this form that's basically the shape of the collar. There's going to need to be some connections to the inner collar, but that will be done later. It's a little difficult because of the way the shirt is folded, so I can press 2 and just press E to extrude piece out right there, and I'll do the same on the other side. just to make it symmetrical. So now I have that little part that is the collar stand. And the collar is folded under, so there needs to be a bit more. And now would be a good time to just go ahead and put an edge loop in, just to get a bit more of that shape and form. So if I press Control R, put one more edge loop, GG to slide that around. So now that looks like a collar, and then we can join it to the other part of the shirt. So if I bring this plane back, and then I bring the 3D shirt, I can put all of the pins, rather than on the outside, I can use this inside curve and just kind of match that. Because this is the closest thing you're going to get to the actual collar stand. But this detail here doesn't matter until you actually are ready to move everything at the very end. Because once you actually snap things together, they're going to pop right back up to that collar. You see how that pops back up? So really the collar is the last thing to do. So just move around, continue working around the shirt to make adjustments and add seams where needed. If you're not sure where to put the seams, look at the garment. Where does it have seams? So for example, we need to have a seam going down the side of the shirt here. I can see it right here, so I might as well use this one. And I grab that edge loop. It looks pretty good there. Perhaps I want to actually have it farther over so you can actually slide it a bit over depending on where that actual seam is. And sometimes it's hard to see on the pattern, so you can actually look at your model and you might be able to see that seam more. Here I can definitely tell there's a seam right there, and then the same seam over here. So here you can see the seam on the arm. And then if I right click, mark seam, that'll be marked and will UV unwrap correctly. I'll do the same thing on this side. I'll find basically where the seam is. I think this is the closest edge loop. Click Alt, mark that edge loop, mark as a seam. We also need a seam up at the collar stand. It's not perfect because it will be a little bit different than needed. And actually the collar stand needs to come up off of this. So turn off snapping. And again, you want to do this at the end because it's kind of a separate piece. But if I slide this down, pressing GG, so that it only has those pieces, and then I press E and bring this up, and then put these pieces where the top of the collar is. Sometimes you need to look at the back to find out where all your vertices are. But now this will be the actual collar stand, and you should be able to see where the seam goes. So if I press 2 and then hold Alt, that's going to be the seam for the collar stand. Right click, mark seam. Click these two edges also and mark seam. So now we have all the seams that we need for the shirt at this level of detail. You can decide if you want to have a seam on the cuff. Sometimes that's desirable. Mark seam. Then if I go to UV editing, select everything, UV unwrap angle based, it should really look like a shirt. And you can see here that most of the pieces look like a shirt. These are the cuffs, the collar stand, the yoke, the two sleeves, the front panels, and the back panel. Ideally, these will all be smooth curves. So the way to correct these and to know that you have good UVs is to go to this side over here, bring your shirt back, and then, for example, let's say right here, I need this to be correct. If I select this point over here, and if you're not seeing your UVs, just turn this toggle on, and that way you can still see them. But I'll find this point. It'll select it in the model, and if you can't find it, just press the tilde key, that's the squiggly key, view selected. There it is, and now I can clearly see that that's in the wrong spot. So if I just press G, move this over, and I want to keep my projection on, I can move this over too, and then if I select everything UV unwrap angle based, notice how now that is straight. It may not look perfectly straight here, but we know that when the UV unwraps, it's unwrapping that fabric, and that looks good. Now you want to move around your shirt, look for anything goofy, for example, like this place right here. Press the tilde key, view selected, orbit around, see what's going on. Sometimes you may need to go ahead and turn the fabric back on so you can see. And then you can actually just kind of move these over to where they need to be, so that's much more smooth. Here we can see that we really need to move the whole thing over, right? Because it is hooking in this way. So this seam needs to go this way. So if I press G and just move these over, and then these should be on that seam line. And the nice thing about this is you correct one edge, you're also correcting the other edge. So you see how this is now moving onto that seam. And of course, I need to fix these edges. And so now if I press everything A, UV, unwrap, angled base, that's going to look a lot better. You see how that all looks nice and straight there? And then the corresponding edge over on this side will suddenly look straight as well. So just work your way around, getting everything to the way that you want it. Pay special attention to the shirt tails. So for example, this should be nice and smooth fabric. This should also be straight. So if I come up to the front here, I can tell that this is not on the right spot. We have a little bit of a problem because we don't see the back shirt. So at the very end, when you turn snapping off, you can correct that because it needs to be just slightly bigger. But for now, just kind of put them in the same spot. Another place to check is the cuffs. These should be pretty square pieces of fabric. So you really want to move your vertices around until it looks perfectly correct. And sometimes you may have problems with the scan. Here you can see that the scan didn't perfectly line up. So I'll just do my best guess to make an even transition between those two scan lines. Then the UV wrap will let you know how close you are. And then down here, you can move them into position really close on the edge of the cuff there. Try to evenly distribute them so there's not a lot of twisting. And then if I press A, UV unwrap angle based, now that one cuff looks a lot better. And then I can do the same for the other one. So continue working around, and then when you have everything the way that you think it looks good, then you're ready to add a few more subdivisions, a few more loop cuts, and then bake that texture. Hopefully this allows you to go around and retopologize a 3D scan of a shirt in Blender.